20 years ago, when I edited a collection of essays on what this looked like across the country, the similarities were really striking, because basically you were seeing workers who were coming together in acts of militancy and solidarity which were unprecedented, and walls were breaking down all over the place, and they were trying to find ways to come together. So in addition to the established unions doing much better, and soaking up many new members and taking on these new layers of new forms of thinking about how to organize, I think, there were whole new sectors coming on stream. And in Toronto, by far the most impressive was the meatpacking industry, which by the spring of 1919 had created the biggest union in Toronto. Its radical leadership. They were briefly on strike at the beginning of May, and then sucked into the IDIA conciliation process, which ended up working for them by the end of the month. They actually got an agreement that for the first time ever, unions were recognized, and they were able to bargain some conditions within that industry. A horrible, vile industry to work in. And a whole range of workers in the service industries, like Bell telephone operators got organized. There were domestic workers. There was just an enormous range. Bank clerks were organizing. And so there was a kind of momentum that was in some ways echoing the willingness of workers in Winnipeg who weren't organized to join the general strike, in the sense that there was a consciousness that you had to work together with other workers and you had to reach out more. Toronto's context, however, was somewhat different, in the sense that there was a very entrenched union leadership that had deep connections to the American Federation of Labor, and had jobs in those, as business agents and whatnot, who hung around the Labor Temple day and night, and then had this kind of solidarity amongst themselves to keep this from getting out of control. It was interesting to watch as the Toronto General Strike starts to build, as they tried to build towards one, that they couldn't completely stop it, but you could see, and they felt they had to respond to this new mood that was there, especially when they had meetings and there was just eruptions of support for that kind of idea. So it all gets triggered in April, when the Metalworkers Council sends a memorandum around to 230 manufacturers and says, okay, we want to negotiate. Silence. They get one response from the secretary of the Toronto Employers Association on behalf of all the employers, saying, nothing doing. We're not going to talk to you. We'll talk to individual unions, but never to everybody together. So on the 1st of May, they walk out on strike. Same day, there's a big May Day meeting in which some of the strike leaders are speaking, because the leadership of the machinists are fairly radical at this point. Leaderships of the carpenters are fairly radical at this point. And on the 13th of May, they go to the Labor Council and say, okay, this has gone on for 2 weeks. We want some support, and we would like you to call out a general strike. The existing leadership had already been battling the left up to this point in a number of confrontations the previous winter, and had held on, and they weren't prepared to say, no, we won't show any support at all, but they were trying to keep it to the level, we'll just pass a resolution saying that the employers should negotiate, right? Hum, hum, hum. Instead of that, a resolution was passed that they should call a convention, and all the unions should go back and poll their members on whether there should be a convention. And it was, they scheduled a meeting of this for 1 week later. Now, this is a breakthrough in terms of how you organize in Toronto. What held it back? And the easy answer is, well, it was a bunch of union conservatives, paid staff of international unions that were holding people back. And that's certainly part of the story, because compared to Winnipeg, there were many more of those who were intervening in the debate to try and keep things from happening, and who had enough sway within their own unions to do it. But there was also a question of, to take, for example, the packing house workers, who were just newly unionized, had a radical leadership, yet didn't join the strike. They didn't join the strike because they had finally just got this contract. And the industrial legality of organizing contract by contract, enterprise by enterprise, was playing out.
Absolutely, it sounds like it.
Yeah, and so the street railway workers partly didn't go out because they knew their negotiations were going to lead to it ultimately did lead to a strike within 2 or 3 weeks after the general strike. So they were all playing out their own scenarios with their own employers, and several of them, the street railway workers had cemented a much stronger position during the war. They weren't willing to risk that. And a lot of it had to do with not wanting to risk fairly fragile negotiating relationships that they had.